the greatest generation, the Appalachian people. And not only Appalachia, but the whole country itself, these rural areas. Now these old people, our elders, so much is leaving us now. They're all but gone. And I'm going to share with you a time of why I think they are the greatest generation. They're all but gone. And I'm part of the baby boomers. And we're leaving day by day. So it won't be long. The old generations will be gone. And so is a lot of their skills. Now what makes them the greatest generation? They survived the Great Depression without any social programs whatsoever, food stamps or any help. They was on their own. It was a hard time for them. And to beat all, 2 world wars, Korean War, even into the Vietnam War. So they had a hard time raising a family. Something for nothing. Now to hear them talk, they would say that their elders had a harder time. And maybe they have. But they didn't endure as much as different times as these people did. So I'm going to share with you, we'll take a look at how it used to be in these old mountains and rural areas of America and the hard times they had, so you can make this decision for yourself. Now, I can remember television all my life. I was born 7 or 8 years after they come out. But I can remember. But back then there wasn't no such thing as television. I remember the 8-tracks, the cassettes. I remember when calculators come out in your hand. I remember when the computers come out in the 80s. Cell phones didn't come out to the 90s. And really computers really got really good around the 90s. And I can remember all that. But these people back then didn't have none of that stuff. If they was lucky at all, they had an old radio. Looked like as big as a refrigerator. That's what they had if they had anything at all. And that's how they kept in touch with the world. Before that, it was just a newspaper. And they're lucky they even got one of them. And the social media, here was the social media of the day. Mail. People wrote across to other family members across the country. This is how the social media was back in the day. And a lot of homes was just starting to get telephones way back then, the ones that could afford it. And most phones would look like this back then. And most homes had electricity way before they had any kind of water, indoor plumbing in a house. Mostly everybody packed it in from a spring or a well, or a little spring house out back or a creek. Electricity come in a lot sooner than indoor plumbing did. And here was the outhouses of the day. This is the bathroom of the day back in the day, before they had indoor plumbing. They looked like this. I remember using these a lot as a boy. And inside them, you had your choice. A newspaper, an old catalog. And you had to watch out for them old waspers' nests. And old black snake every once in a while. But that's the way it was in the day. And the old houses, down in the little small towns and the flats, houses look like this. Little old farming houses. And up an old holler, up a mountain somewhere, houses look like this back in the day. This is how people lived. And if you're lucky enough to have a big piece of land, they usually had big families. They had farmhouses like this. The big old family farm. Working all this acreage. That's just the way it was back in them days. And a lot of people up in these mountains lived little farms like this. Didn't have much, but they had land, and they used it too. What sustained them, that they learned from their fathers and their fathers before them, they worked this land. He provided all their needs, and this is their livelihood. Well, then the stock market crashed in 1929. Just completely crashed. Stocks and bonds become useless. And people lost all their livelihood in this. And this was slowly a chain reaction across the country to all the businesses. And as time went on, thousands of men lost their jobs. Thousands. About half the country was unemployed. And people would wait in line all day long just for a handful of jobs. So times got hard as time went on. And all the banks, they just closed. They was not federally insured back in them days. So whatever they had, they couldn't pay out. But what could pay out paid only pennies on the dollar. And everybody lost everything they had in these banks. And people still resent these banks today. I know my grandparents would tell me about this. And all across the country, these little towns, they couldn't support what they had. And a lot of people was moving from town to town looking for jobs to raise their family. They had nothing. It was a hard time. Now, back in these old mountains, most of these Appalachia people in these mountains didn't even know it was depression. It may have been weeks or months before they even knowed it, unless they come out to the store or see in a newspaper or somebody told them, because they never had two pennies rubbed together anyway. They either growed it, made it, or they traded for it. But as time went on, they finally learned it too, but they didn't feel the pinch like the rest of the country. And the worst people that had it the worst, that suffered the most during these times, was out here in the southern part of the Midwest. They called the Dust Bowl. Combination of drought and old farming practices with just no water. Everything become dust. Instead of rain, it just had dust storms. And these dust storms would just blow up tons and tons of dust and blow it across the countryside. And no matter what they done, they couldn't stop it. They couldn't help it. They couldn't stop Mother Nature. And they tried their best to hold on to what they had. But as time went on, I reckon this drought lasted about 10 years. Between that and the Depression, they had a really hard time. They lost about everything they had. They had no choice. They couldn't hang on to their land. So they had to hit the road. They went west, most of them, back towards California, or back where they could find some jobs like everybody else. But times was hard. They had everything they had on the back of an old car or truck, heading west. Most of them lived out of their vehicles. Most of them just lived in little tents and shacks along the road as they was trying to find them something, a better livelihood. Times was hard for these people. It hit them the hardest, I would say, in this country. The hardest. Now, my grandmother would tell me, back when she was a younger girl, that they would see sometimes the dust would carry this far east into the mountains, and they would have real hazy days here and there. But not all the time. But she did tell me stuff like that. Now back here at home, this was about the same time too, early 30s, that the government started Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA. This is where they started building dams in the river systems of the Tennessee Valley to control flooding and bring electricity to homes and stuff. And you can see a map here of what the dams that they dammed up from all different states here in East Tennessee, Alabama, North Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, just everywhere. And complete towns were submerged, building these lakes. They bought out everybody that was around these lakes, took their land, and these people had to relocate. So they had a hard time too, but not on the scale they did out in the Midwest. And another thing that happened at this time in the 30s, there was a blight that was imported from Asia up in New York that nobody knowed about. It got loose into the mountain, into the airstreams, and it carried down the Appalachian mountains and killed all these American chestnut trees. These trees were old, and they were a livelihood to the people of these mountains. Their chestnuts, they depended on them. Well, it killed them out slowly, all down through the Appalachians. Millions of them. Only a handful ever survived. Now these people of Appalachia and rural America, if they had land, they was going to work it. This is how they was going to survive these hard times. They'd work this land and grow anything they needed, one way or another. This was their livelihood. This is what they've always known. But some didn't have a lot of land, so they had to go into different kinds of things to make a living for their family. A lot went into mining, and these Appalachians were full of coal. And they lived in places like this, little mining camps. Some of them were good places to work, and some wasn't. It was a hard job on your physical health and just day-to-day living. $1 a day most of them made. This is what they lived in. And a lot of people went into logging too. These Appalachians were full of just natural resources of logging, coal, and they made a living at it. And the people that worked these railroads too, a lot of them went into this, building these railroads and keeping them up through these mountains. That was a hard job in itself. Because without these railroads, none of these other jobs of exporting these natural resources, coal or lumber, out of these mountains, rock, Tennessee marble, anything, without them, it couldn't have been done. And the government too, back in the 30s, started a program where the young men from about 18 years old up to 30-something, they would work in a thing called the CCCs, and they would go around the country, and they would just help infrastructure, building dams, clearing property, repairing forests, roads, whatever needed to be done, and they were all over the country. And what's CCC? It's a department called Citizens Conservation Corps, CCC. And they got paid about $20 a month, and the stipulation I've heard, they had to pay $5 back, send to their family every month. So they was trying to just keep everybody working instead of just moseying around and no jobs. So that was a good program at the time. And this went all the way up to World War II when they stopped it. And most of them just went off into the military. And that time, Pearl Harbor happened and World War II was on. And a lot of people out of these mountains and the whole country went into the military. So that was a hard time in itself. Well, back across America, the Appalachians and the rural areas across this country, how did these people survive? How did they make it back in them days with no social program? Well, it wasn't hard. They just went back to what they've always known. They growed it on their own. All the vegetables, fruits, everything they needed. They knowed how to work the ground. They knowed how to survive. And nothing went to waste. They canned everything. Now these country people, you got to remember, they always prepare for the seasons ahead of them. So they canned everything. I mean everything. If it could be canned, they canned it. So that got you by in the hard winter months. And as far as produce or chickens, poultry, they had it on the farms. They grew their own chicken. And very rarely did they kill a chicken. I know my grandparents did. They'd kill one every once in a while. But most of the time, these were for eggs. And these eggs, what you couldn't eat, you had a bounty of them. You took them down to the country store, and you traded with them. They was good as cash. So you could get goods that you couldn't really make it on the farm. And they traded all the time with these eggs. And anything else extra they had. So it was just a community thing. And they made it just fine. They traded for this, and you had this, and they had that, and you traded. That's how they made it back in them days. Nobody had no money, really. There just wasn't none to be had. And they growed their own hogs and raised them up. And around frost time, they would slaughter these hogs, and they would sell the extra ones, trade with somebody. They'd smoke their own meat, had all they wanted, knowed how to preserve it, and they would trade and barter with it. And back on these farms, they had their own cows, and they milked them regularly. Processed their own milk. And a lot of these little farms sold their milk. Them days are long gone. And they'd take their corn, stuff like that, and they'd take them down to the local community mills. They was mills all over the place back in them days. And here's how they used to grind it up there at these mills. Make their corn meal, even flour. This is the process of it. They would bag these up, or they would trade their extra and barter with it. And they would come in bags like this from some of these mills. And they would take these bags that they had designs on the flowers, and they made a lot of clothes with them, dresses. Now these women, they know how to make quilts, some of the best quilts in the world. And they made clothes, dresses, blankets, whatever they need for the family. And they could make about anything they wanted to. Furniture, baskets, brooms, anything around the home. And they trade and bartered with this. Now these little old hand tools here, they didn't have no power saws, nothing like that. No electrical power, engines, chainsaws. All they had was stuff like this. And they built about anything they wanted to. Had little blacksmith shops around these farms. If they didn't, their neighbor down the road did. And they could do about anything they needed to do in these areas. Anywhere from shoeing their horses, keeping their wagons going, even their old machinery. They could forge it, or they could make it, or they could repair it. And back then, the old transportation of the day, just the turn of the century, was the old buggy. That was the old car back in the day. Around the farm, the old work truck was an old buckboard. Anything they needed to do, that was the way it was. And then the old cars come out, the old Model Ts. They didn't have much on roads. You see the kind of roads they had to drive in, but things improved over time. But here was the workhorse, the work tractor of the day on the old farm. Good old reliable set of mules or horses, They knowed what they was doing. The more they done, the more experienced they was. Most trustworthy animals. And they finally got replaced with the old tractor. This is some of the old tractors first starting out. You see them sitting here and there. And the old cars, as they advance, they finally retiring them. You see them sitting around out on these old farms, middle of nowhere. And back then, it wasn't nothing. If you had a little common sense, mechanical ability, you could repair any one of these little old vehicles and keep them running. But them days is long gone. And if you had to do any long distance traveling back in them days, it was on a train. These trains went all across the country. They carried people from one place to another, and especially all of our soldiers during the war. Now, how did these country people survive the cold wintertime? Throughout this country, these rural areas, it was cold. Even north you go, even colder. But they survived. A lot of them just burnt wood. That's how they survived. In some places, they burned a lot of coal too. That's just the way it was back in them old days. That's how you heated your home. And it took a lot of kindling, log splitting, to get you through a winter. Burning an old wood stove or a cook stove with wood, it took a lot of wood. You could see here in this picture. And you didn't have to be a man. A lot of women could chop wood, kindling. It didn't matter. I know I've seen my grandmother chop a lot of wood when I was a little old bitty thing. She could chop as good as a man, just a technique to it. And the old stoves they used, cooked their dinners, even warmed their home with it, these old wood stoves. And they were nice too. Do some really good cooking on them. Here though, ain't nothing better than some homemade biscuits and some good old gravy. Makes me hungry. And little old stoves like this, the girls of the house seemed like they had to grow up so much faster to help take care of the family. They learned to cook. And these warm morning stoves, I spent many a morning around one of these when I was a little old thing. Put coal in them. They kept warm. You'd have to rotate around though. Little old stoves like this. Cook on them, heat with them. Old stoves of the past in these old homes. And when it come wash day, these women didn't have no fancy washer and dryer like they do nowadays. They done it by hand. Before they done this, they'd heat water and just beat it in a big old cauldron. But this is what they used back in that day. Hot water, cold water, and an old washboard. Hard work. These women, for their families, rubbed their fingers raw, washing these clothes. Old stuff like this, lucky they had a wringer. And like I said, the girls of the house usually had to grow up fast to help the family. They learned how to cook, how to wash clothes. They started at an early age. Real early age. But they had to do what they had to do to help the families. hard work for these girls. But they learned, 'cause these families, they had big families back in them days, especially if they had a farm, so they could help out with each other on the farm. They had big families. It didn't matter what color, what race you was either. Big families. Your family had all girls. No boys. But they had big families back in them days. And they took their kids out in the fields with them when they was young too. Help hoe corn, work the gardens, work the livestock. They just learned from doing it. And who better to learn from? Your grandparents. They taught these babies how to cook, how to live, and everything. Nothing better sitting down with your grandparents and listening to them. You don't pay much attention to them when you're young, but when you get old enough to realize they knowed a lot, they're gone. That's the sad part about it. And the boys of the house, they learned to hunt. If they didn't do nothing else, they learned to hunt early, at a young age. That's just part of these mountains. Because if you couldn't do nothing else, you didn't have nothing else. No livestock, you didn't have nothing. If you knowed how to use your shotgun and knowed how to hunt, you could survive. All you gotta know is how to hunt. And they hunted these squirrels mostly. This took the place of chicken. A lot of people eat chicken, but like I said, they use chicken for eggs. But these squirrels took the place of that chicken meat. And these were good eating squirrels too. Good eating squirrels. This is a good protein for the mountain men. And you've seen my metal detecting channels. I find these shotgun shells where they've hunted these squirrels since way back before they even made shotgun shells. That was a good protein for these mountain people, and they lived on these squirrels too. Well, these people, these Appalachians, most of them were God-fearing people. It didn't matter if they was Southern Baptist, Methodist, Pentecostal, Primitive Baptist, it don't matter. They were God-fearing people. And many a person been baptized in these creeks coming out of these mountains, all up and down these Appalachians, and all across America as far as that goes. And they made their own entertainment, their own little get-togethers and shindigs, whatever, in these mountains, celebrate separate occasions. And there were some good musicians come out of these mountains too over the years. I wished I could play their music, but you just can't. Too much copyright. There's some good music come out of these mountains. Good musicians. And yes, they made their own drink too. A lot of conflict out of this, a lot of money being made, but this has always been going on since these old guys had come in these mountains. It'll never change. And yes, they used to grow tobacco on these farms, but it ain't profitable anymore. They had their own smoke here. That was a big thing to pay taxes with on these farms, but times change. And these old people, they took care of their own. When their elders got older, they took care of them, what they could, until they left this world. And the same thing happened to them. Their kids took care of them. That's the way it was. And these people of the mountains, they come in here, they learned the plants from the Native Americans. Old ginseng right here. They knowed what herbs healed what. And they done what they could. That's the way it was in these mountains. And I miss sitting around with my elders, listening to all their wisdom, all their skills, all their knowledge of just life, and I miss especially their stories. And my grandparents standing there talking to me, telling me stories, I miss that so bad. But they're all but gone now. Very few of them left as time goes on. And like I said, I'm part of the baby boomers, and my people, my generation's leaving too, day by day. So I could go on and on about these mountain people. I'll let you make your decision. They was the greatest generation. They endured so much. So I want to thank you for watching. God bless every one of you, and I'll see you next time.